The first time the HOA president told me I was trespassing on my own pond, I was standing in water up to my knees, throwing feed to my grandfather's catfish. "Sir, you can't be in there," she shouted from the shore, hands on her hips like she owned the horizon. "This is private HOA property. You're scaring the wildlife and disturbing our residents." The wildlife she was talking about were my fish. The residents were the people who'd bought houses around the water my family had dug and maintained for 70 years. I straightened up, the bucket of floating pellets in one hand, and looked at her. Perfectly ironed linen shorts, pastel polo, oversized sunglasses, expensive sandals that had never seen mud. Her name was Meredith Lang, but everyone in Cedar Cove called her the Lake Karen. "Ma'am," I said, "I'm standing on land I inherited. That property line you like to ignore, it runs under my boots." She scoffed and gestured broadly to the curve of houses around the shoreline. "The pond is part of our common area," she said. "It's in our marketing materials, our website, our amenities list. The board has voted. It belongs to Cedar Cove, not you. If you keep entering it without permission, we'll call the sheriff." Behind her, the glossy Lakefront Living sign the developer had stuck by the entrance gleamed in the sun. Ducks paddled lazily by my old dock. Beyond them, rows of beige two-stories lined the water's edge like they'd been there forever. Thing is, I remember when that pond was just a scraped-out depression and a trickle of spring water. My name is Wade Harper. I'm 52 years old, second-generation well driller, and the third Harper to take care of this 10-acre patch of Texas blackland. My granddad dug Harper Pond with a borrowed dozer and a lot of stubbornness back in the 60s, berms and all. He stocked it with catfish and bluegill. My dad built the dock. I learned to swim in that brown water, learned to cast, learned what it feels like to sink fence posts on a July day when the sun feels like it's welding your skin. 15 years ago, when the county started spreading out and land prices shot up, my folks sold off 40 acres of pasture to a developer. Taxes were killing them, but my father was no fool. He carved the pond parcel out of the sale, kept title in the family name, and wrote the contract so clear a blind man could read it. Seller retains full ownership and control of existing pond, dam, and water rights. Buyer acknowledges pond is private property. Any future use by buyer or buyer's successors shall be with seller's written permission only. I have a framed copy of that clause in my kitchen. The developer back then, a guy named Holloway, was decent enough. He asked if he could run a small intake pipe into the pond to irrigate the front entry beds and the little strip of grass around the clubhouse. In return, he'd pay us a yearly fee and keep the banks mowed. My dad agreed. They signed a simple license agreement, revocable at any time. For a few years, it worked fine. We cashed the check, they kept the common areas green, and everyone knew the line. The pond was ours. The walking path and benches were theirs. Then Holloway sold to a big management company out of Dallas, and somehow that handshake understanding got turned into exclusive lakeside amenities in their marketing brochure. Meredith moved in 3 years ago and made it her personality. She got herself elected HOA president under 6 months. Next thing I knew, there were paddle boats, a little floating fountain light show, and kids jumping off my dock while their parents sipped wine on my shoreline like it was a resort. They built a gazebo that encroached 2 feet over the old survey stake. They stopped paying the annual irrigation fee pending review. Their landscapers started driving mowers right up to the water's edge on my side, tearing up the native grasses I'd planted for erosion control. I let a lot of it slide longer than I should have because I remembered the days when this was my dad's place, and the only people here were cousins at family reunions. The world changes. Land changes hands. Maybe, I thought, sharing the view was the cost of not selling everything. But there's a difference between sharing and being erased. The first real line crossing was the sign.
One morning, I walked down to check the water level and found a brand new aluminum sign bolted to a post at the path entrance. Cedar Cove HOA Lake, residents and guests only. No fishing without HOA permit. The post was on my side of the line. I took a photo of it, sent it to the property manager with a polite email. "This is my land. Remove it by Friday or I will." They didn't. So Saturday morning, I came down with a socket wrench and took it out of the ground myself. I left the post leaning against the clubhouse door with a copy of my deed taped to it. 2 days later, I got my first violation notice. Unauthorized removal of HOA property. Trespass. Destruction of signage. Fine amount? $500. They'd mailed it to Wade Harper, Lot 19, Cedar Cove Subdivision, which was funny because my house sits on Old County Road 7 and predates the subdivision by 50 years. I don't even pay dues. Meredith had added me to their system as if willed paperwork could conjure jurisdiction. I called the management office. The young guy who answered sounded apologetic but useless. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harper, but the board says the pond is part of the association's common property. It's on our plat." "Then your plat is wrong," I said. "Pull the county records. Harper Pond is its own parcel. It's never been transferred. If you think different, show me the deed." Silence, keyboard clacking. I'll have to get back to you," he said. He didn't. Instead, I started seeing Meredith more. She'd patrol the shoreline like a mall cop, tiny clipboard in hand, reciting rules to 12-year-olds trying to fish. She posted photos on the neighborhood Facebook group of unauthorized activity at the lake, carefully cropping out my farmhouse in the background. When I took my John boat out to clear brush from the dam face, she filmed it from her patio and captioned it, "Random man and boat? Does anyone know him?" The final straw was the irrigation pump house. Holloway's original setup was a small submersible pump and a 1-inch line just deep enough to feed the front entry. When the new management company took over, they'd quietly upgraded it. Huge new pump, 3-inch line, valves branching out to every cul-de-sac, island, and common strip. On paper, they still had a small draw from a farm pond. In reality, my water was keeping $400,000 worth of landscaping alive. I found out how serious it was the summer we hit a drought and the county slapped restrictions on everyone. No watering yards more than twice a week, no car washing, no topping off pools. The city shut off irrigation meters all over town. Cedar Cove stayed lush. Their sprinklers ran at dawn every day, fed not from the city, but from my shrinking pond. When I brought it up to Meredith, "Hey, this isn't what we agreed to, and you're draining my pond to keep your entry flowers perky," she didn't apologize. She smiled. "The aesthetics of the neighborhood are important to property values," she said. "And frankly, Wade, if you were a team player, you'd be happy your pond is finally serving the community instead of just collecting frogs."
That was the day I stopped being patient and started reading. I'm not a lawyer, but I am my father's son. He used to say, if you're going to sign something that can take your land, you'd better read it twice and out loud. So that night, I cleared off my kitchen table, spread out every document I had, deed, old survey, Dad's handwritten notes, the license agreement with Holloway, and started reading like my water depended on it, because it did. The license was only 3 pages, plain English. Non-exclusive, revocable permission to withdraw water for limited irrigation of subdivision entryway and adjacent common beds, not to exceed 10,000 gallons per month. They were supposed to have a flow meter on the line and report usage annually. Any expansion required written consent from the Harpers. If the pond dropped below a certain level, they had to shut it off. No one had asked us about bigger pumps. No one had asked us about lines to every cul-de-sac. No one had shut anything off when my granddad's old depth mark on the dock sat 2 feet above the water line last August.
Here's something every landowner should understand. A license is permission, not surrender. It's a handshake you can legally pull back. It doesn't transfer ownership, and it sure doesn't give someone the right to pretend your property is theirs in glossy brochures. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office instead of the job site. Concrete steps, metal detectors, that same old smell of dust and toner. I asked the clerk for the Cedar Cove plat, the Harper Pond deed, and any recorded easements touching my place. I watched her scroll through the system, click, print. The plat showed the subdivision lots wrapped in a horseshoe around a blue blob labeled Lake. In tiny type underneath, Common Area, Tract A, Cedar Cove HOA. I felt my jaw tighten. "This says the pond is theirs," I said. The clerk shrugged. "Plats show how the developer laid it out," she said. "Ownership's whatever the deeds say." She printed the tract deed. It described the walking paths, the clubhouse lot, the playground. Then it stopped. No meets and bounds for the pond, no reference to my father's parcel, no transfer. So they platted my pond as if they owned it, but never actually bought it? "Looks that way," she said. "That's between you and them, but as far as the county's concerned, Harper Pond is still yours." On the way out, something else caught my eye on the public computer: groundwater and surface water permits. I typed Harper into the search bar. One entry popped up, an old registration my dad had filed when the state started asking big users to log their withdrawals. Agricultural and recreational pond, 8 acre-feet, domestic and livestock use. No one from Cedar Cove was listed. So, not only were they drawing water far beyond what Holloway ever agreed to, they were doing it under my registration during drought restrictions. If the state ever came looking, my name would be on the line. By lunchtime, I was sitting across from a man who actually enjoyed reading this stuff. Howard Bell, 70-year-old water lawyer, friend of my dad's from back when farmers fought the River Authority over meters. He put on his glasses, read the license, the deed, the plat, the restriction notices from the county. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at me over steepled fingers. "Wade, you've been more patient than most. Too patient. You still own the pond, the banks up to the property lines, and the water rights. The HOA has a revocable license that they've exceeded by about a mile." "I was trying to be neighborly," I said.
Neighborly is one thing, he said. Letting people turn your property into their logo while they stop paying the fee and ignore the conditions, that's how you wake up one day and find a judge calling you the trespasser. Good news is, you've got paper. They've got assumptions. He pulled out a legal pad and started writing. "Here's what you're going to do," he said. "You're going to send them a formal notice revoking the license. 30 days. After that, no more irrigation withdrawals, no more equipment on your land. You're going to demand they remove any structures they've built that cross the line, and you're going to put them on notice that continued pumping will be considered trespass and conversion of your water." He scribbled more. "You're also going to CC the management company, the developer's successor, and the county. And if they keep posturing, we copy the state water board and the district attorney and let them explain how they ran lines all over the place without permission." I sat there, rolling my cap in my hands. "Howard, I don't want to nuke the place. My mailman lives over there. Half my church does. It's not their fault she's like this." He sighed. "Then you make it clear who you're mad at and why. You're not shutting off the view. You're shutting off the free ride. If they want a lake in their marketing, they can pay you fairly and follow the rules. Or they can look at a mud hole." So that's what we did. The letter was 3 pages, tight and polite. It cited the license paragraph where either party could terminate with written notice. It listed the ways they'd breached: exceeding volume, expanding use, failing to report, failing to pay. It gave them 30 days to shut down the pumps and schedule a meeting to negotiate any future use. It warned that any continued withdrawal after that date would be treated as trespass and theft of water. At the end, I added one line in my own words: "I have been more than generous in allowing Cedar Cove to enjoy the pond my family built.
I am not willing to be erased from it. We sent it certified to the HOA, the management company, and the developer's office in Dallas. Meredith showed up at my gate the next evening, letter in hand, face the color of overcooked shrimp. "You can't do this," she said, waving the paper. "The pond is part of our community. It says so on the plat. We have rights." "You had permission," I said, leaning on the fence. "Permission you abused. Permission I just took back." She jabbed the letter at my chest. "We'll sue you. We'll put a lien on your property. You can't just shut off our water because you're in a bad mood." "You think I'm in a bad mood now," I said. "Wait until the state finds out you've been sucking down 8 acre-feet through my registration during Stage 3 restrictions." That gave her a half-second pause. "We are following all guidelines," she snapped. "Our landscapers said—"
"Your landscapers don't sign enforcement letters," I said. "Look, I'm not saying you can never use it again. I'm saying we're going to sit at a table with surveys and lawyers and maybe a mediator and write a new deal that reflects reality. You pay, you meter, you stay on your side. Or you turn off the pumps. That's it." She glared at me through the fence like I'd asked her to cut off her own oxygen. "The board will not be extorted," she said. "We voted. The pond is ours. You're going to regret this." "I've regretted letting it go this long," I said. "I won't regret fixing it." For the next month, an odd tension settled over Cedar Cove. On my side, life went on. Well service calls, mowing my own pasture, keeping an eye on the pond level. On theirs, the sprinklers kept hissing at dawn, green arcs against a sky that hadn't seen rain in weeks. The 30-day deadline came. Nothing changed. Howard sent a second letter. "Notice of continuing unauthorized withdrawal. Cease operations immediately or further action will be taken." We CC'd the county water district and the state board this time. Meredith responded, not with a lawyer, but with more theater. She blasted me on the neighborhood Facebook group. "Our so-called neighbor is threatening to drain our lake and let our beautiful community die," she wrote. "We must stand together against this greed." Some people bought it. Most just wanted their property values safe and their HOA dues not to spike. That's when I made my decision. If they wouldn't shut off voluntarily, I'd make it physically impossible for them to keep pretending my resources were theirs. I called a buddy who does pump work and ordered a new gate valve and a temporary siphon setup. If I was going to do dam maintenance I'd been putting off for years, I might as well take advantage of the low water. 3 weeks later, on a Wednesday before sunrise, I walked down to the pump house on my side of the pond. Mist hovered over the water. The houses were dark, but I could see the clocks flicker in kitchen windows as coffee makers kicked on. In the clubhouse yard, sprinkler heads already stood at attention, waiting for pressure. I unlocked the little block shed that housed the original intake. My dad's old brass valve was there, feeding the line that dove under the bank toward their pump. We'd never had a reason to touch it before. I put my hand on the wheel, thought about Granddad running that dozer, about my dad signing that first license, about Meredith telling me I should be happy my pond was serving the community. Then I turned the valve clockwise until it stopped. Out across the water, the sprinklers at Cedar Cove choked, sputtered, and then sagged back into the grass like wilted flowers. For a long second, nothing happened, just the soft hiss of pressure bleeding off somewhere beneath the bank. Then, across the cove, one sprinkler tried to stand up, coughed a thin jet of air in muddy water, and collapsed. 3 more followed, popping up then flopping sideways like fish on a dock. The neat little morning mist Cedar Cove was used to became a sad burp. I stood there listening to nothing. No pump whine, no rushing water through PVC, just cicadas starting up and a blue heron complaining downstream. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "This is Wade," I answered. "This is Meredith Lang, president of the Cedar Cove Homeowners Association. Did you shut off our irrigation?" "No," I said. "I shut off my irrigation. Your pumps just happened to be drinking from my line." "You have no right," she snapped. "You're damaging HOA property. You're putting us at risk of thousands in landscape losses. Turn it back on right now or we will take legal action." "Meredith," I said, keeping my voice even, "I gave you notice 60 days ago,
twice. Your right to pull water ended then. If you want a new arrangement, call your lawyer, call mine, and we'll talk. But the free tap is closed."
She hung up without another word. By noon, you could already see the difference. My pasture grass was as scraggly as ever, but the manicured strips at Cedar Cove's entrance had lost their shine. The petunias nearest the street drooped. The little Bermuda patches in the cul-de-sac islands went from golf course green to the color of a dollar bill that's been through the wash. I didn't enjoy watching their landscaping suffer, but I did enjoy knowing, for the first time in years, that the level of my pond wasn't being dictated by a timer on someone else's control box. That weekend, I started the second part of my plan, draining the pond down far enough to work on the dam. I'd been putting off riprap repairs and a culvert replacement for a decade because the idea of dropping the water made my stomach knot. Now I had an extra reason. My buddy Todd brought over his trash pump and a couple 100 feet of discharge hose. We set the intake on my side, away from the intake pipe, and ran the hose down into the old draw past the dam where the creek used to run. Turned the key, listened as the pump chugged to life, and watched a solid stream of brown water arc out into the dry creek bed. It wasn't dramatic at first, a few inches over a day or two, but water lines on old stumps don't lie. By day 3, folks across the way started noticing. The posts on the Cedar Cove Facebook group went from, "Why are the sprinklers off?" to, "Is the lake leaking?" to, "Wade is literally destroying our property values." Someone took a photo from their deck of my pump humming on the bank, hose stretched like a fire snake over the dam, and captioned it, "He's draining our lake out of spite." They tagged the HOA, the city, the county sheriff, and for good measure, the local TV station. I didn't reply. I kept working. Every evening after work, I walked the receding shoreline, noting spots of erosion I'd patch with rock, old trash long buried in the silt, the original clay core my granddad had packed by hand. It was like watching history emerge as the water fell. On the 5th day, the sheriff's SUV pulled up to my gate. Same deputy who'd handled the noise complaint out my way last year. He leaned on the fence, thumbs hooked in his duty belt, looking more tired than mad. "Afternoon, Wade," he said. "We've had about 100 calls that you're stealing a lake." I held up a folder already under my arm. "Brought the paperwork to save you a trip back to the truck." He flipped through it there at the fence. Deed, survey, license revocation letter, the CC'd notice to the water board. I watched his eyes track the legal descriptions. "So, this whole pond parcel is yours. They never bought it." "Nope. And you've got a lawyer telling you you're fine to drop the level for maintenance." "Yes, sir. He even offered to explain it to anyone who wants to argue." The deputy blew out a breath. "Then this is a civil matter," he said. "As long as you're not dumping that water somewhere it'll flood folks downstream, it's your hole to drain." He glanced at the half-circle of houses. "You might want to be ready for them to sue, though." "They've been threatening that for months," I said. "I figure if it ever makes it in front of a judge, I'd rather have the facts on my side and the dam in good shape." He nodded. "Fair enough. I'll file it as no crime, civil dispute. Maybe next time they'll call their own lawyer instead of 911. Across the pond, I could see Meredith on her patio with her phone to her ear, watching us like a hawk. When the deputy drove away without handcuffs, she threw her hands up in disgust and disappeared inside. 2 weeks later, the water board finally called back. A man named Sanchez introduced himself on the line. "Mr. Harper, I've reviewed the materials your attorney sent, plus the drought enforcement logs," he said. "I'd like to schedule a site visit. It appears someone's been reporting no usage under your registration while drawing a whole lot of water." "That would be Cedar Cove," I said. "I'll be here any day you pick." The day he came out, the pond was at its lowest in my lifetime, maybe 4 feet deep at the center. The lakefront yards now overlooked a wide ring of cracked mud and exposed roots.
The little floating fountain lay tilted on its side in knee-deep water, pump housing dry as a bone. It was not the postcard they'd put in their brochures. Sanchez climbed out of his truck with a clipboard and a tablet, wearing boots that had seen more than one ranch. He shook my hand, then walked the bank slowly, taking in the exposed intake pipes, the junction where Cedar Cove's bigger line tied into my old 2-inch. He pointed with his pen. They never had permission for that enlargement. No, sir, I said. Holloway had a small pump for the sign beds. Everything else came later, without asking or paying. He took photos, measured pipe diameters, jotted notes. Then we crossed the old fence line and walked into Cedar Cove proper. Meredith met us on the path like she'd been pacing. Finally, she said, ignoring me, addressing Sanchez like he was her personal referee. You have to make him stop this. He's killing our lake. Our home values are dropping every day this goes on. Sanchez regarded her over his sunglasses. Ma'am, I'm with the water board, he said. I'm here about withdrawals, not aesthetics. He turned off our irrigation. He's draining the pond. He thinks he owns all of this, she said, sweeping her arm around the shoreline. He does own all of this. At least that's what the county records say. Your association has been withdrawing significant volumes of water under his registration in violation of drought stage restrictions and without a valid agreement. That's why we're here. Her mouth opened, closed. We had an agreement with the developer, she said weakly. The pond is part of our community. It's on the plat. Sanchez turned his tablet so she could see the screen. The plat doesn't convey title. Your deed for Tract A stops at the property line. The license your predecessor signed limits use and gives Mr. Harper the right to revoke. He did, months ago. She looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. So he can just take it away? Like that?
He can stop giving you free water, Sanchez said. Yes, as for the pond level, landowners are allowed to manage their own impoundments within reason, especially for dam safety. He flipped to another document. What concerns my office is that your association reported no irrigation withdrawals from surface water sources during Stage 3 restrictions while maintaining lush landscaping fed from this pond. That's a problem. Neighbors had started to gather, drawn by the sight of yet another official truck. You could hear the whisper travel. Water board, violations, fines. Someone muttered, thought the lake was ours. Sanchez looked between us. Here's what's going to happen, he said. We'll be issuing a notice of violation to Cedar Cove HOA for unauthorized withdrawals and false reporting. You'll be ordered to disconnect your pumps from this pond unless and until you negotiate a new, properly filed agreement with Mr. Harper and bring any use into compliance with drought rules. There may be penalties. He turned to me. Mr. Harper, we'll send you a letter confirming the revocation and clarifying that future enforcement under this registration will be based solely on your actual use. Appreciate it, I said. Meredith stepped closer, voice dropping to a sharp whisper. This is unbelievable, she hissed. You would really rather see this turn into a mud pit than share it with your neighbors? I looked past her at the cracked shoreline, the exposed stumps. It hurt, sure, but I also saw, for the first time in years, a chance to rebuild it the right way, without wondering whose sprinklers were dictating my water line. I'd rather see it respected. If that means brown grass for a while, so be it. The board meeting that followed a week later made every prior HOA scuffle look like a bake sale. They had to let me in this time. The water board's letter sat on the projector screen behind the dais, Sanchez's logo and all, terms highlighted in yellow. Unauthorized withdrawal, false reporting, cease and desist, civil penalties. Residents were furious, not at me, but at the idea that fines and remediation might come out of their dues because someone got greedy with a free resource. You told us the lake was ours, one man said, standing up, letter in hand. You said he was the problem. You used pictures of his dock to sell us exclusive lakeside living. Did you ever bother to get that in writing? Meredith looked 10 years older than when she'd first marched down to my shoreline barking orders. We acted on the information we had, she said weakly. The developer's rep told us, Developers leave, paper stays. You signed things you didn't understand and picked a fight with the only guy who did. Someone suggested suing me to force an easement. Howard, sitting quietly in the back, finally stood. You can certainly spend your members' money trying that, but you'll lose. The chain of title is clear. The license was revocable. My client exercised that right. Your best option is to negotiate a new deal or accept that the pond is an amenity you get to look at, not own. In the end, they did what they should have done months earlier. The HOA voted to dismantle the gazebo posts that crossed my line, pulled back their walking path to the surveyed boundary, and installed small, accurate signs. Private pond, access by permission of Harper family only. They hired an engineer to help me shore up the dam, cost shared fairly. We sat down with lawyers and maps and too much coffee and wrote a new water agreement. Under that deal, Cedar Cove could, in non-drought years, draw a modest metered volume for the entry beds only, in exchange for a market-rate annual fee and a commitment to cut their overall outdoor water use by half. During any future restrictions, the pumps stayed off. All of it was filed with the county and the water board.
The paddle boats went away. The floating fountain never came back. The brochures quietly changed from private lake to pond view lots adjacent to protected private property. A year later, after a mercifully wet winter, Harper Pond was full again. The new riprap on the dam gleamed in the sun. Native grasses I'd planted on the newly graded banks held the soil like a green fringe. Fish moved just under the surface, dim shadows swirling. One evening, I stood on my rebuilt dock with a coffee in hand and a rod at my feet. Across the way, kids rode bikes along the path that now clearly stopped at the boundary markers. Their parents sat on their patios, looking out at the water they finally understood wasn't theirs, but were still lucky to enjoy. My nephew trotted down the path from the house, tackle box banging his leg. "Uncle Wade," he said, "Grandma says you drained the whole lake just to prove a point." I smiled. "Your grandma likes a good story," I said. "What I did was remind some folks where the lines are." He looked out at the water, then back at me. "Think they'll try to take it again?" I shook my head. "Not this bunch. They got introduced to the big kids at the water board. They'll read the fine print next time." We dropped lines into the brown water, watched the bobbers settle. On the far shore, the entry flowers looked a little less extravagant these days, but the oaks were healthy, the grass a normal, honest green. Sometimes protecting what's yours isn't about building higher fences or starting louder fights. It's about knowing exactly where your rights begin and end, putting it in writing, and being willing to let things get a little ugly, muddy even, rather than let someone quietly paper over your name. Atlas, my granddad's old lab's namesake, not the dog from any HOA story on the internet, barked from the bank as a fish tugged my line. I set the hook, grinning. Harper Pond was still Harper Pond, and everyone in Cedar Cove knew it now.